where you stand on issues, how you live your life, and how much good you can do in the world are greater challenges than a lunar mission.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all humankind. Your hosts in England and the Netherlands, Matthew, Russell and Julio Aprea.
Oh yeah, baby. Our warden. Our warden. Our first ever Apollo astronaut interview. Our one and only. Much missed, of course, R.I.P. But, get this, Julio. It's the 50th anniversary of Apollo 15 today, on the 26th of July.
50 years already. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah. I still wasn't born at this point, but only just.
8 years before I was born.
Wow.
It's getting closer.
Yeah, it is getting closer, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's the first proper Apollo mission, because all the other ones were just testing it out. Whereas this is the first one that actually goes to do some science, a J mission as they called it.
And the first one to carry the rover.
Which is got to be the coolest space thing ever. They freaking drove a rover on the moon.
I would have preferred to fly one of those than on Apollo 11, I think.
Yeah. I think
Just
Apollo
for
15.
the fun of it.
Yeah. Can you imagine it?
Those
So
guys
good.
were having a good time there.
Definitely. And doing science. Of course, Al Warden wasn't one of them. I think he became the most remote human of all time at that point. More remote than the other Apollo command module pilots.
I always thought it was the guys from Apollo 13 because they had to do the gravity assist.
Yeah, but they're all together though, aren't they? Al Warden's on his own.
Sure, but then you can see who was sitting exactly where the point that we were the furthest.
Yeah, no, but
Apollo 13.
I think he also did one of the most remote spacewalks as well. A spacewalk not in low Earth orbit. That's a good EVA, isn't it? If you're doing it out there.
That's not groundbreaking. That's space breaking.
That's space breaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about that.
Enough about that, but not enough about human spaceflight.
Not enough about human spaceflight, because that's what this is all going to be about.
Lots of human spaceflight.
Yeah, there's
lots of human spaceflight these couple of weeks.
Not just human spaceflight, but commercial human spaceflight. Julio, who's our guest? Because this is an absolutely epic interview.
Ken Davidian of FAA fame. FAA stands for
Federal Aviation Administration. It wasn't always called that, of course. It was at one point called the Civil Aeronautics Administration. Just to confuse things.
Yeah, but however, why I wanted to bring Ken into the show is not. I mean, yes, his role at the FAA it's key for the type of work that he does, but he also has been, well, we go in details during the interview when he gives us a description of his career. And you see, he has been all over the place. And I like to say that he's the one that has been looking at this industry of space tourism for more than a decade now, analyzing it. And he knows a lot about how the sausage is made. And I thought it would be interesting to get that. And he's not shy, as you will find out.
No, I mean, for me, it was really surprising having someone from, I guess when you talk about a regulator, which the FAA are really, I just didn't realise like that kind of secondary role of also encouraging people to use the resource. I think that's really interesting.
So I would say this is quite a particularly long interview.
Yeah.
But it seems to be a pattern every time I'm on the show. I think I extend your interviews.
Yeah, you tend to make me stay up until about 3 o'clock in the morning editing these things as well, Julio. You're the worst.
I apologize.
Stroke the best.
I apologize. But we do it for the audience, right?
Yeah.
But before we go into the interview, a few items that happened this week. I don't know if you want to go through some of them.
There is quite a lot of news this week. I mean, one of them is, of course, the Norca module having a little bit of problems getting to the ISS.
Which is carrying the European robotic arm.
I know, which
that
is one
we
of the cool,
discussed in the past.
Yeah, it's really cool, that, isn't it? I hope it gets there.
I hope so too.
Um,
So this week we had the Blue Origin flight.
Yeah,
A few days ago, yes.
Yeah, and that, I guess that's the big one, isn't it? And we should, after the interview, we should have a little chat about the controversy around that, because
why not? Why not?
Because we do have a little delve into it with the.
I love controversy.
Yeah,
I love controversy, but as you said, let's save everything related to Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin for after the interview. I think the interview is a good way to have a view of these two events, and then we can go deeper with our own opinions after the interview. What do you think?
Exactly. Well, no, totally. I just thought before we did it, I just wanted to put into context just how many human flights into space there have been this year, because it's been quite a lot. But they're not commercial. So I mean, the big news is obviously the two commercial ones in a row, with Branson and Bezos having a little race, a billionaire race, which is, I guess, where the controversy is. The billionaire.
No, I mean, define commercial. Technically, the Virgin Galactic flight is not commercial. Who bought a ticket to fly on that?
Yeah, but we talk about that with Ken.
Okay, then we go.
Let's see what Ken. Yeah, no, we can go into it afterwards. But
the question is, what is special about this particular Virgin Galactic flight, given that it's not the first one? But okay, let's go into that later.
Yeah, let's go into it later. But I just thought humans into space started this year on the 9th of April, 2021, with 3 astronauts going to the Soyuz, on a Soyuz going to the ISS. And then only a couple of weeks later, 4 astronauts on Crew 2, on a Crew Dragon, to the ISS. And then a couple more on Shenzhou 12 to the Chinese space station on the 17th of June. So that's quite busy, isn't it? There's a lot of people. Now, there's 3 different human space launch systems this year, when there's only been one for ages.
There's certainly good news. Yes.
Yeah, and I guess 2 more systems taking people into space as well. Although, as you said, Virgin Galactic have been sending people into space, and I put that in inverted commas, depending on who you ask, since the 13th of December 2018. Is that what you said?
That's my the first, what you could consider their first crewed space flight was on 13 December 2018. And another piece of trivia that I heard this week, it's not really news, but it's just nice to know that I think the record of maximum number of people in space at the same time was reached, or there was a record in this week or last week with one of these flights. Yes,
there's 7 people on the ISS.
7 on the ISS plus 3 in the Chinese one. So basically 7 plus 3 is 10. I mean, I'm an engineer. I know this.
So 14 is the most amount of people that have ever been in space.
Yeah, currently you have Russian, US, French, Japanese, and Chinese in space. And as I was saying, when Blue Origin flew, you had 14 people in space for about 10 minutes. And when Virgin Galactic flew, you had the 2 pilots plus 4. Was it 4 people?
Yeah, 4 passengers.
So at that point, you had 16 people in space.
16. So 16 is the maximum, and must be the most amount of different nations as well. Chinese, Japanese, French, English, American, Russian.
I don't recall all the nationalities of the Virgin Galactic flight.
16 people in space. Yeah, that's. I didn't spot that. Good spot, Mr. Julio Aprea. Not only that, by the end of the year, we might have yet another human transport system as well, with the Boeing CST-100, which is going to try and do another test flight this month, and then hopefully an actual crewed test flight near the end of the year.
Let's cross our fingers that it happens. The more the merrier on this.
So there'll be quite a lot of different systems that are able to get into space. Although The Virgin Galactic.
We're learning from the lesson of being, so many years, not stuck with Soyuz, because Soyuz is a wonderful way to go to space, but let's say on a single point of failure.
I suppose the Chinese have always had their Shenzhou, haven't they, during that period? It just hasn't been used much.
Not that much. And not for the space station, not for the ISS.
No, true. Julio, let's stop messing about. Shall we just listen to Dr. Ken Davidian's interview? Because it's long. We better get going.
Sí, escuchémosla.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
Julio and I are here with Dr. Ken Davidian from the FAA, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Is that right, Ken?
That's absolutely right.
As Julio said, you've got a very interesting career. Can you give us the highlights?
I started out as a government employee. I graduated in 1983, almost 40 years ago, from the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. I had grown up in Cleveland, Ohio, which is north by about 2 hours. And the job I got was at NASA Lewis Research Center, now called NASA Glenn. And my job was to design liquid rocket engine nozzles and to analyze the performance of liquid rocket engines. Rocket engineering, I'll say. And it was a hoot. It was a dream job. Who wouldn't want to go work for NASA? The shuttle had just started flying. And so it was absolutely fantastic. I was there for like 16 years or so, and great educational opportunities there. Immediately after starting work, they offered us the opportunity to get a master's degree. So I went to Case Western Reserve to get a master's just down the street in Cleveland. And then in 1989, I got the chance to go to International Space University for, it was a 10 weeks summer program at the time. And so it was the second one. It was the second one in Strasbourg. So NASA was absolutely fantastic. And then that was in 1989. And then in 1997, they said, Ken, do you want to go work at ISU for 3 years? Because I was a big Francophile. I'm a Francophone. I've been going to France since 1975. That's coming up on 50 years now. And so they knew that, the bosses at NASA knew that. And so they said, Ken, do you and your wife want to go to France for 3 years to help work with ISU? I was like, heck yeah. So loaded up the truck and we went to Strasbourg. And so I got to work in Strasbourg for 3 years, helping put together the summer program for Houston and Cleveland. I had helped write the proposal to bring it to Cleveland. So I helped do it in Houston, ran it in Cleveland, and then stayed on for a third year, ran it in Thailand. Came back to NASA. It had changed its name by then to NASA Glenn. I came back to NASA and it wasn't as exciting, let's say, anymore. We had outgrown the garden, one of our managers said. So we actually quit the government and went and worked for an ISU alumni company called Paragon. Tabor McCallum had started that. He had been in the first summer session. And so I went and worked for Paragon for a year, actually moving to Berlin to work in the cargo lifter program, a large airship, 240 meters long, 60 meters in diameter. And so that was a hoot, living in Eastern Berlin for a year and a half. And that was great. But like all great airship companies, it totally tanked. So I ended up getting a job at X Prize Foundation, yet another ISU-related company. So I was there for about 15 months, and they were having some hardships. They actually cut us to halftime after about 6 months. My wife and I were substitute teaching at local high schools. I was teaching math to eighth graders. At the worst, the thing is, you get a call at 5:30 in the morning, and they say, "Hey, Ken, we'd like you to come in today." It's like, "Great. What do you want me to teach?" Girls phys ed. It's like, holy crap. This was totally like, a shock. So they know what they say? They say, "We're going to have you teach English." It's great. So you're sitting there trying to remember everything you recall from literature and stuff. And you get there and they say, "No, it's going to be girls phys ed." So most of the time I was doing like junior high math and I did this for about 6 months. And then I remember one day I was in the library with a bunch of students. And of course they think you're an idiot because you don't know their names and all that sort of stuff. One of the students came up to me in the library and said, "Mr. Davidian, do you know what the acceleration due to gravity is?" I said, "Sure, it's 9.8 meters per second squared or 32.2 feet per second squared." And they go, "Oh my God, how did you know that?" I said, "Well, I'm an engineer." he said, "What are you doing here?" And that's when the light bulb went on. I said, "Yeah, you're kind of right. What am I doing here?" So actually, my wife had gotten the job back at Paragon, but as a consultant to Boeing, putting together the connection by Boeing in-flight internet program together. This is 2002 or so, 2003. So she was in Irvine, California. I ended up getting a job back with Paragon, but in Tucson, California, moved to Tucson. We had just rented a house when she got a job at NASA headquarters in Washington. So we had to quit the job in Paragon. And whenever anybody asks about Tabor or talks about Tabor and Jane, I tell them that they are the best bosses I've ever had that I've had to quit from twice. We quit when our contract were over or when, the job was done, and I'm sure they wanted to keep us, but we felt we were a financial burden to them. So we would quit, and they are a fantastic pair of people, and the companies they run are absolutely fantastic. But anyways.
Yeah, they have their current company is
Space Perspective. It's called Space Perspective.
Another space tourism company.
Yeah. So after Paragon, they moved on to Worldview, which actually first worked with Eric Eustace, who's the guy they built a spacesuit around him, and they Carabiner linked him to a balloon, and they sent him hooked up to a balloon up to 150 or whatever 1,000 feet, and they let him go, and he skydived back down. Grant Anderson, who's now the president of Paragon, came and stayed with us at our house, and so I've got a picture of him hanging on the wall with Eric Eustace standing in front of the spacesuit that's now in the Udvar AZ Air and Space Museum, part of the National Air and Space Museum here in Washington. But Worldview was created when Tabor and Jane left and created another balloon company to carry. The idea was to carry a capsule that would carry people up to high altitudes for tourism purposes. It kind of morphed into a persistent surveillance kind of platform for homeland security and some scientific payloads. So Tabor and Jane, who still wanted to do the human space flight activities, they split off again and started Space Perspective. And they just recently did a test flight of their test capsule Neptune 1 up to altitude. And so they're currently in the process of taking the lessons learned from that test and building it into their next capsule.
Yeah, spoiler, I have Jane has agreed already to be on the show in the near future. So
Jane is absolutely wonderful. Jane is, you're going to have a great time. It's going to be a 10-time better show than this one because she's the goddess. So after Cargo Lifter, we went to X Prize. After X Prize, we went back to Paragon. I was in Tucson. My wife was in Boeing. She got a job at NASA headquarters in Washington. So I was what they called the lagging spouse. I came to Washington, and she was so pissed because she's going, "Aren't you going to look for a job?" It's going, "I'll look for one when I get there." 2 days after I get there, I get an email from a friend at Glenn who said, "Hey, I see that you worked at X Prize. NASA's starting a prize program. The guy at headquarters, his name is so-and-so, why don't you contact him?" So I contacted the guy. Turns out he was an ISU alum named Brant Svanberg. He hired me. It took him a while to get me on as a contractor, but they brought me on as a contractor. And so then Brant ended up Brant worked on putting together what became the TOTS program. It was originally called the Black Knight program, and Brant was putting together all the PowerPoints on that. So then I kind of took over as a contractor, took over the management of the Centennial Challenges program. So ran Centennial Challenges, the Lunar Lander Challenge, the Space Elevator Challenge, the Astronaut Club Challenge, the Lunar Regolith Challenge, the Personal Air Vehicle Challenge. So we ran this for about 4 years. And then in 2007 or 2008, the IAC was in Scotland. And I had submitted a bunch of papers, and they all got accepted. And they all got it. I wasn't there. NASA wouldn't let me because I was a civil servant at the time. But NASA had a limit of 50 people. And
once you send the NASA administrator and his entourage, you're already at like 35, 40 people.
Well, so
I used to organize a workshop for young professionals, and to get young professionals from NASA was very difficult because once you have the as you said, that limit of 50 gets covered very quickly by the big guys.
Yeah, that's right. And so, and every center director, and then their couple of chosen few. And so they didn't send me. And I was running a workshop. As you know, NASA at the time was putting together Ares 1 and Ares 5. Ares 5 kind of looks like SLS. Ares 1, and they had these series of conferences, the global exploration conferences. And the first one was in Disney World. The second one was in Houston, I want to say. And the third one was in Denver. And at the Denver one, I had a panel that was talking about commercial space. And I gave a great presentation. I don't say it was great, but it was called Old McNassa. And talking about how old McNassa had a farm and, they didn't recognize these crazy farmers growing these crazy crops off on the side and stuff. So anyways, on my panel, I had a bunch of people. And one of the people I had was George Neild, who was the head of the Associate Administrator of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation at the time at the FAA. And so after the panel, we were out in the hall talking, and he said, "Hey, Ken," I was griping about how I wanted to go to Scotland and I couldn't go. And so George said, "Hey, Ken, if you came to AST, I would send you to the IAC." And I said, okay. So I left NASA, went to AST. And so ever since Daejeon, which is South Korea, starting in 2009, I've been going to the IAC.
You mentioned the AAC. I don't remember what that is.
AST. AST is the organizational acronym for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. So the office.
How does that work?
How does that work? It's called government efficiency. When the Office of Commercial Space Transportation was created, I think in 1985, it was at the Department of Transportation. And it was called the OCST, for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, which makes total sense. And then, I forget when it was, 1994 or something, it got moved from the Department of Transportation down into the FAA. The FAA is one of like 7 or 8 different agencies that are part of the Department of Transportation. We're known as a mode of transportation. The other ones are like highways, railways, maritime, pipelines and hazardous materials, that kind of stuff. And so FAA, because it's aviation, every single one of its organizational abbreviations starts with the letter A. So A it means aviation, and then ST means space transportation.
There we go.
If you were in the highway administration, all your organizational abbreviations would start with H. And so NASA got away from using codes like this because they're hard to communicate. They cause confusion. It ends up with a 5-minute discussion like this every time somebody asks a question.
And we've sent the listeners to sleep now.
That's kind of not my job.
Everyone knows that I love a good initialization, though.
No, I mean, I have that in my office. We went through a few organizations, so I even forgot what my acronym is at the moment. STS, that's for sure, which means space transportation, not space transportation systems, not space transportation services, but everyone gets confused. So it's just because the IT system requires 3 letters. So it was like, we are space transportation, ST. Let's just add an S.
Let's add an S. No, and this is where I hate when IT, it's the tail wagging the dog. We're not supposed to be slaves to the robots. This is the robots taking over. And this is,
I think we met for the first time at the International Astronautical Congress in Cape Town.
2011.
I don't remember the year. And I remember you and I and Will Pomeranz, who is now at Virgin Orbit, were having dinner, I think was, and we were discussing the idea of how to bring more young professionals to the Congress. And this is where we discussed the idea of this paper competition on, space is business, we called it.
Yeah. So I'm also involved in that conversation, probably at a later time, was Emmanuel David. Remember she was there, and then Bukowski or something. There was a woman, I forget her name, but she had a Polish last name, but she was American. But anyway, your memory is much better than mine. I could not tell you when we first met, but we've known each other for quite a long time. Yes. Cape Town was amazing. And it's because of that experience that I ended up going back for my PhD in Cape Town. And right now it's terrible what's going on in South Africa, right? And luckily, I don't think it's happening. All the riots and stuff are going on in Cape Town. I think it's going on mostly in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, which is a region where the Zulus hang out most farther east in South Africa. But it is kind of terrible. And of course, the pandemic going on and raging in South Africa. So it's a real hard time I get emails from my friends over there from time to time. But anyway, Cape Town was amazing. I don't remember the first
That's where
time.
you did your PhD, you said.
So that's where I did my PhD. So I never wanted to get a PhD in engineering. My bachelor's was aerospace. My master's was mechanical engineering. Never wanted to get a PhD. But after working for AST for a number of years, part of the job and one of the attractions of going there was helping to grow the industry. The job is to be a cheerleader for the industry. And how do you grow space tourism? And how do you grow, orbital human, tourism kind of thing? And that's kind of one. So AST has two missions. One is to protect the uninvolved public from crazies like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson. The other one is
which we will discuss at some point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the other mission is to encourage, facilitate, and promote the industry. And so we have these two missions explicitly stated in our authorization language, which causes some people a bunch of grief, and they think, oh, safety versus promotion, and it's a dichotomy. But in one of the books I just read, I loved that there was a little phrase in there that said, all hail continuums over dichotomies. It's not one or the other. In fact, every regulatory agency has a dual mission, even though it's not explicitly stated, to preserve nature or to protect the environment or to ensure the safety of the public on one side, but also to encourage use of the resource. I mean, in the United States Department of Interior, they built roads so people could go visit the parks. They built lodges and restaurants and gas stations to encourage people to use it and to enjoy the beauty. And so this safety and promotional kind of dual mission goes hand in hand with any regulatory. It's a balancing act. So anyways, I loved the encourage, facilitate, and promote mission. And so I decided, the government is doing a lot of great things. NASA is doing wonderful things. FAA is doing wonderful things. But I don't hear anybody coming at it from an academic and organizational perspective. So I decided to get a PhD, and I found a business school that didn't require 2 years full-time of courses. I didn't have to quit my job. I've got a pretty cushy life here in DC. So I decided to go to the Southern Hemisphere because that's where where the research-only programs are. Your choices pretty much are Australia or South Africa. And so I went to South Africa, having experienced it once in 2011, and it was absolutely fantastic then. The wine region is just amazing down there. It was one of the criteria for getting a PhD is being close to a wine region. And Lyon, I was looking at Lyon, but, again, 2 years of full-time coursework.
I'm going to get all the French against me, but to this day, after living 10 years in France, I prefer South African wine.
South African wine is phenomenal. French wine is phenomenal. Hey, to each his own taste. And it's hard to get mad at any of it. So I love it. I mean, I was bringing home 36 bottles every time I took a trip to Cape Town. I went about 15 times. When I was in France, when we lived in France for 3 years, every time we'd come to the States, we'd bring back 20, 30, 40 bottles. So I've got 175 bottles in my cave at home right now. And most of it is French, but anyway. Anywho, so I decided to get a PhD, not in economics, because I love economists. Some of my best friends are economists, but they tend to be hyper rational when they think about markets and stuff. And especially with commercial markets, you're talking about people. You're talking about sociology, and this pulls it toward the business side. And so the business perspective looks at markets as social systems, not just systems of finances and economic production. So it's a lot more sociology. It's a lot more qualitative. In fact, instead of using
one of the big Nobel Prizes in economics in the past few years was on behavioral economics, on putting aside the idea that economics, everyone is rational.
Right. Well,
that's right. The opposite.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a big movement in economics, evolutionary economics, economic sociology. There's a lot of work going, and a lot of the traditional Roger Nelson, all these folks that are saying, hey, listen, economics is great, but what they're finding is they model a system using 2 or 3 independent variables, and they write out the equations and they start tweaking the model, and things go haywire, are super nonlinear very quickly. And so they're going, this isn't right. We're not modeling it sufficiently. And so they're saying we have to embrace the complexity. They assume a lot of things away. And so little by little, I think they're moving in that direction. And then you've got the business folks coming in a little bit more qualitative, looking not at variance research, which says, here are the functions between the independent variables and the dependent variable, and this is how you can predict the future. But the process research folks in the business community are saying, hey, listen, you don't even know what the IVs are, what the independent variables are. How can you prove that those are the right independent variables, that those metrics are those indices are the right indices? And so we're stepping back, trying to understand the phenomenology of industry emergence, which is basically innovation at an organizational industry segment or industry level. And so trying to understand the process of innovation is really, really complicated. There's a bunch of there's like innovation meta theory, where there are three major groupings of innovation theories. And so it's a super complex topic. And guess what? Our managers hate it because it's super complex. They want something that's like drawn in primary colors with squares and circles, maybe a triangle, and here we are coming in with data charts that look like spaghetti. They look like bowls of spaghetti, right? And so try to make sense of that bowl of spaghetti and trying to understand, how do you interpret this stuff? It's not just the technologies or the innovations, and it's not just the companies or the industry segments, how they're working together. It's the context in which they're operating, and they all kind of interact with each other to create
the ecosystem.
To create some perceived outcome of these innovations. And predicting the future is impossible. So the predictive strategy is out the window. So you've got to go more with an adaptive strategy kind of approach, something that says, hey, listen, there are unknowable unknowns out there. And there are things I cannot mitigate. There are uncertainties I cannot mitigate. So now how do you operate within that environment? What information do I need? And so this is where, when we talk about innovation, we're not just talking about technologies, and we're not talking about how much money is going into it, but we define innovation the process of innovation very broadly. It's people generating ideas, entering into transactions and relationships with others to create outcomes in a changing institutional and organizational context. So people, ideas, transactions, outcomes, and context. And all of a sudden you're talking about everything, almost everything. I mean, way back in the mid-50s, a guy named Talcott Parsons was a well-known sociologist. He came up with this agile method, this agile model, basically a 4-part model of what makes societies, what are the necessary action systems, he says, of societies. One is institutions. One is like resources, like knowledge and human capital and people. One is going to be the technologies. And then the last one is society. It's the society of the cultural, the symbols and the beliefs and things like that. And as a business, academic and researcher, we kind of say, okay, I can model the institutions and the resources and the technologies, and we'll just, not talk about the society thing for a while. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We realize it's there. We realize it's hard to model, but we leave that to other people. So the model that I used in my research was kind of those 3 major parts and how they interact. And it's already way too complex, right? So the research ends up with like a laundry list of, here are all the resources an industry needs to succeed, to become long-term viable. We got the list. And then so now we go through and we say, okay, here's how this industry is accumulating this resource. And we identify major events for that. And we go through the system, and you can draw lines and you can tell stories and all this sort of stuff. But we're still missing the societal part. And ultimately it's about people. And this is why I tell people, when I was in engineering, we used to make fun of business majors, right? And in fact, there's a great Futurama episode, season 2, episode 1, called Mars University, where the professor has made this hat that he puts on a monkey named Gunther, and Gunther becomes really, really smart with this hat, and things happen and blah, blah, blah. He goes over a waterfall, the hat gets damaged, it's only working half speed. And the professor says, hey, I'll fix that. And the monkey says, no, don't fix it. I'd rather be a monkey of moderate intelligence, put on a suit and go to business school than be super intelligent and be alienated. So this is kind of the thing where we would make fun of business majors because they couldn't handle the hard math. But in fact, dealing with people and understanding society, that's the tough part. Hell, once you learn math, engineering is kind of, cookbook, And so it's really kind of interesting how you change when you get old.
I have to tell you, since I moved from engineering to communications, it's a lot more difficult dealing with people than dealing with satellites and machines.
Anybody who's worked in retail will know dealing with people is not easy. It can be very, very challenging.
So you're doing this PhD. That is basically what you just explained is a big part of the topic of your research, which just to get the whole idea, what is the title of this research?
Oh, the title was something like the accumulation model of, industry emergence for the human suborbital space transportation industry. So it's basically...
And over time, I remember that you have written many papers in which you take these sort of innovation models or industry structure models, and you apply them specifically to specific segments of in the space industry, and in some cases to space tourism, right?
That's absolutely right. So starting in 2009 or so, 2008 or 9, we started, it was funny. I never used to read. I would read maybe one book a year kind of thing. And then I bought a Kindle. Yay, Jeff Bezos, right? I bought a Kindle and I started reading. One of the first books I read was Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma. And then I read Michael Porter, Competitive Strategy. And then I read Henry Mintzberg, Strategy Safari. And I started reading all these strategy books. And I started reading all these organizational theory, industry emergence books. And then finally a friend said, you should go get a PhD, because I was doing all this reading. So a lot of the early books I read had models, had ways of analyzing industries. And so I was going, hey, why not? It might not be perfect, and we might be doing, just a little bit better than a high school level's worth of analysis, but at least it's solid. The analysis methodology is solid. Let's study our industries using these models. So I started out working on suborbital tourism. I've always been interested in the suborbital tourism market. But then we started with Clayton Christensen's disruption innovation theory. Then we went to Michael Porter's 5 forces. Then we pulled in game theory, Brandenburg and Nailbuff's co-opetition. They have a parts analysis, players, whatever they are, the parts analysis, I should remember. And so then we would hold workshops, 2-day workshops, where we have a group of people work on the different parts, the first understanding the players, who are the course, and we would look at it at the industry level. So we look at the players, we look at who the suppliers and distributors are, who the competitors are, who the complementers are. That's the players. And then then do you have the parts in front of you?
Possible products that could be substitutes as well.
Right, that's right. So all that. So we would look at all that, and then we would write a paper based on that. So I've got a wiki page with all these papers on it. And every once in a while, we refer to those things. I refer to them from time to time. And we looked at, applying either Porter's 5 forces, Christensen's disruption innovation theory, the game theory, parts analysis, and then we used some other analysis, right? Abernathy.
I did one of those papers on the Abernathy Utterback.
So this is product research and then process research, and going through
and how you get to a dominant design.
Yeah.
But I was always more interested in the orbital industry. And you had this interest in the suborbital tourism, and that is a very hot topic.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, but I was going to ask that. What is it about suborbital? Because that's a because I'm like Julio. It's like the orbit. It seems to be all about orbital since Gagarin.
Yeah.
So what was it about suborbital that you thought was interesting?
I guess I thought that suborbital. I actually had a chance at suborbital. I mean, only $250,000. I mean, it seems like a lot of money, and it absolutely is. But it's definitely not $28 million, right? And so I think I've got...
Some people are paying $28 million for a suborbital, which I do not understand.
That was a philanthropic auction. And so I would be real surprised if that was the cost of a ticket. We don't know what the cost of the tickets are, but he did say he's approaching $100 million worth of sales, which was the first time I ever heard them say what their ticket sales were, because they never really...
We're talking about Blue Origin here.
Blue Origin. They've never really acknowledged ticket sales. They said, send us an email if you're interested, but they've never posted a price. Virgin Galactic is approaching $100 million, but they've acknowledged their reservations since 2005. They couldn't get the original $100 million investment from the Virgin Group until they had 100 customers signed up. And they signed up at $200,000 a pop. So if that's 20 million, I hate to do public math, but I forget how many zeros it got. But Virgin Galactic has 600 customer or reservations right now, but they've flown none of them. Blue has actually flown one. So, until you fly a paying customer, you're in what's called pre-production mode. And so Virgin is still in pre-production, but Blue could argue that they're in production now. So we'll see if they plan on having 2 more flights. And if they're flying people who have paid for seats, A, we might get an idea of what the ticket price is, and B, they'll be in production. They're starting production. I mean, there was a case to be made that Blue Origin was not interested in suborbital, right? They're still planning for the New Glenn, which is their large orbital vehicle. They've talked about the New Shepard, the suborbital vehicle, kind of being a testing a piece of hardware.
Demonstrator of their technology. How they learn to do reusability.
Which makes total sense.
And it makes sense to then just put some people on top and make money out of it, right?
If there's a whole lot to be made, they can make $100 million a shot with one flight of the New Glenn versus having to fly New Shepard a bunch of times. But if they're going to do it, great. More power to them. They had never talked about doing it. They had never, advertised their reservations and stuff. So the signals were never there. They never talked about, like Richard Branson in Virgin Galactic had talked about, hey, going up and coming back down to the same location is not the be-all, end-all of what we want to do. We want to do point-to-point. We want a point A to point B transportation. That's where we're headed with this. And so, he kind of had a vision, longer-term vision for what he's doing. And we've never heard that longer-term vision for the suborbital applications from Jeff Bezos. At least I have. Of course, Jeff Bezos.
And also Branson was very public and outspoken about it almost, I would say, since the next day after the X Prize.
That's right.
I know it was some time after, but it felt like it was immediately after, while Blue Origin kept everything secret for many more years.
Yeah, they didn't lift the veil until 2018 or something, right? They basically were pretty in stealth mode for a long, long time. It's only been recently, and so Blue Origin is doing a lot of things, not just suborbital, right? They're developing the BE-4 engine. They're working on the New Glenn, and now they're doing the lunar stuff. Virgin, they split off Virgin Orbit. They've kind of been focused on what they're doing. They incorporated the spaceship company manufacturing end of the operation into their company. But they've been kind of really focused there. And then when they went public, all of a sudden, now all the pressure gets turned on, because every quarter they have to say, hey, listen, another $60 million of losses and $0 of revenue. So the shareholders don't, for some reason, that comes as a surprise to them. So, until they start flying people and they can actually start cashing those checks that they've been sitting on since 2005, 2006, it's going to be a while. I mean, some of the people they plan to fly, Ashton Kutcher, right? His wife just said, hey, you've got a couple babies now. You're not going up into space. And so he canceled his reservation.
Who?
Isn't Ashton Kutcher?
Yeah, Ashton. Yes. Yeah, from that 70s show.
I have it's just a name to me, but yeah. Because the 70s, I lived the 70s. That 70s show is my life.
I'm not a big follower of celebrities, but he married Mila Kunis, and they were both in a sitcom called That 70s Show that I used to watch when I was a kid.
Nice. I mean, that's the thing. And granted, obviously, I don't follow them very much either, but that's the customer base right now, right? So, and that's okay. I mean, automobiles, when they were first made, were only for the rich. They were each handcrafted, put together, and only rich people could afford them. But over time, by 1913, Henry Ford came along, mass produced them, bada bing, everybody started buying them.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I guess has to be addressed, is the fact that after Branson and Bezos's flights, it's Twitter is like, and I love your quote earlier on, by the way, about all hail the continuum over dichotomies. But it's like the dichotomy on Twitter is essentially these are heroes or they are the worst. How dare a billionaire do this? Is how does your organization? How does the FAA how does it kind of sit with those kind of issues, or did it just try to just completely just not get involved?
Well, so yeah, it doesn't get involved. And, I don't think the FAA as an organization has a single voice, really, right?
Yeah.
There's, again, all hail continuums over dichotomies. They have a press office, and of course they won't favor one company over another, all that sort of stuff. The fact is, when you look at how industries evolve or how technologies come into this world, they cost a lot of money at first to do, and then through experience, the operational cost comes down, the safety goes up, and then more and more people can afford to do it. And so this is just following that trend. These folks, no matter if you agree on how they made their money or not, are taking their money and they're dumping it into a new technology, proving that it can be done, generating, enough buzz early on to hopefully make it safer and cheaper. I mean, this is what happened in aviation. I'm a Lawler, so my L's are hard, but Louis Blériot in, I forget, early 1900s, he made his money selling headlamps for automobiles. He took that money, started designing airplanes. So design number 11 was the one that crossed the English Channel and won the London Mail Prize for crossing the English Channel. And so it's just, this is what people who make a lot of money in one industry do. They try to push the boundaries on the next industry. And so it's kind of normal. Not everybody's perfect. This is why I love Marvel Comics. Their heroes are flawed. These are flawed heroes that we're looking at in real life. Elon Musk, I love Tesla. I own one. I love SpaceX. It's absolutely fantastic. Sometimes he says and does things that is totally, I wouldn't agree with, kind of thing. So, I mean, whatever.
I have to say that to me is something, and I know Matt might disagree, but I think that something is like, I like that aspect in which they, as you said, they are flawed. Because every time you see someone that is perfect, it's not because they are really perfect. It's because they have a whole machinery of press people and PR cleaning that image constantly, right?
Yeah.
So I like when you can see the flaws as well. It makes them more human.
But I mean, Twitter's limited to 280 characters these days. There's only so much nuance you can perceive. And plus, I mean, to get followers and whatnot, you've got to be as extreme as possible. So you're going to take an extreme position. This is why I got off of Twitter way back when. It's not a nuanced discussion going on Twitter. So it's a loud megaphone. And so, I mean, I totally get it. There's problems here on Earth. Why don't we solve these problems before we go off into space? Number one, this is their money. They get to do with it what they want, at least here in the United States. If they want to go out and jump down a hole, dig a big hole and jump down it, that's up to them. They can knock themselves out. Number two, I've got this beautiful 3D printed coin here. There's two sides to the coin. And so you want to maximize the awesome and minimize the suck. I'm sorry, I shouldn't point it that when I say suck. You want to minimize the suck and maximize the awesome. So this is a part of maximizing the awesome. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We want to cure cancer. We want to get rid of COVID. We want to minimize the suck. But at the same time, you got to celebrate things like James Webb Telescope. This is maximizing the awesome, to be able to see back in time in the history of the universe, by yet another order of magnitude or whatever it is. That's phenomenal. And so this is where space does a great job. They maximize the awesome. It sparks the imagination, and people can they can latch on to, oh my God, it's going to ruin the climate, all these things. It's possible. Yeah, it's, rubber.
Compared to a number of airplanes flying every day.
Right, but that's a rational argument. And it was funny. I just watched a video on YouTube where they were talking about trying to convince people of something. Hitting them with facts and figures doesn't change their mind. But like this was a case, I think it was COVID. They were talking about trying to convince people to take the vaccine. Giving them facts and figures about the vaccine doesn't do it. But showing them the effects of pulling at their heartstrings. Dealing with them as people, not as machines.
Winning hearts and minds.
Right.
Yeah.
The people that are
often that doesn't work either. It seems to be it's almost like FOMO. It's like, well, everyone else is having it. Right. I mean, that tends to be the one that works. I mean, the argument that I kind of see creeping in with it is with something like space tourism. It's harder to see the further goal with it. Unlike something like air travel or cars, and the ones that you mentioned earlier that were sort of made by billionaires in the past, you can see that the car will eventually become really useful for the general public. Whereas space tourism, is it going to become something that's useful and kind of
even though the costs are completely different, I can think of the example of when I started listening to MP3 files 20 plus years ago, and it was a bunch of nerds that had computers with a powerful enough sound card that could process that, and it eventually ended up changing the whole music industry, right?
Right.
So maybe this is step one. Maybe this is the first application of many.
Well, number one, absolutely. In terms of innovation, seeing the future is not the skill that we possess, right? Number two, when I was looking at the different modes of transportation, or looking for analogs to suborbital tourism, I looked at aviation, I looked at steamships, I looked at automobiles. Like you said, in those types of modes of transportation, basically the government stepped in and said, hey, this would be a great way to get mail from here to there. Why don't you carry mail? With the aviation industry, they gave them the Kelly Mail Act. They gave them contracts to move mail from point to point. And primarily it was mail. There was some passenger traffic that was going on, like with steamships and stuff. And you don't get that with suborbital tourism. There's no need for mail. The thing that the analog that came closest that I was able to find, talking about a technology that was developed by the military, kind of made so that converted for non-military use, and then tried to make a tourism industry out of it, is submarines. So this is where it's semi-interesting. We didn't need to move mail from some point underwater to some point underwater. So we didn't get a mail contract from the government. It started as a military thing, but there are submarine tourism companies around the world. There are not a lot of them. And like in Hawaii or in places where people go scuba diving, I imagine, where you're...
Yeah, just now, I don't remember the name of the company. They just started again doing tourism down to the Titanic. A few weeks ago.
So this is the closest, and I don't really know that much about submarine tourism, but this is kind of the industry that I think has got probably the closest analogy, where it's harsh environments, right? So adventure tourism, it's probably expensive, and you probably got some eccentric person with a big long gray beard, and wearing a not ratty T-shirt that takes you out on tours. And so who knows? Maybe that's where suborbital tourism's going. I have no clue. But like you said, it's not really analogous to some of these other things because there are some other factors at play. The only other industry which is non-transportation, which seemed like it was analogous, was computers, actually. So computers in the United States, at least, was entirely government funded the early days from the early 40s and whatnot, and it was IBM. But the thing is, by the early 1960s, they came out with the 360 that accounting companies really wanted. There was a huge demand for it, and so they were able to wean themselves off the government contract and go into the non-government world and be successful, and open up an commercial operation. So this is my not so subtle segue into how do you define commercial, and why do all of a sudden, do we care? Most industries don't ask the question of, is that commercial? They just kind of are commercial because they have a large non-governmental customer base. Whereas in space, at least I get wrapped around the axle of what is commercial. There was a Kalis Foundation and Secure World Foundation report that came out in February of 2021 that it was called Lost in Translation. It was talking about how people look at the Chinese commercial space activities and they can't tell whether it's commercial or not. And they say, we can't tell how we need to react based on what's going on in China because we can't tell if it's commercial or not because we don't know what commercial means. And so the question of what is commercial now is the next, that's what my latest papers and stuff are about.
I mean, my definition would be, is the product offered openly in the commercial market?
Okay, let's say it's offered and the only customer is the government. Is it commercial?
Depends on how many governments.
One government. You're making a rocket.
Yeah, I was going to say Dragon, for example. Is not, that commercial?
No, Dragon. Well,
it clearly is commercial.
Dragon is used for more than one client. So no, it's not. It is commercial. You can pay to access it.
Yeah, I was going to say Crew Dragon is going up with Inspiration 4, which was bought. It's an all non-government crew.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so it is commercial. By the way, going back to the submarines, OceanGate is the name of the company if you want to look into it.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. When you were talking about military applications, suborbital was all about the military. Suborbital started because we wanted to do point-to-point transportation of nuclear payloads.
Yeah, right.
So, and even today, I could imagine that it would be a very attractive product if you could suborbitally place your troops wherever you want.
And don't think that the Department of Defense hasn't looked at Starship for doing exactly that, right?
Yeah.
There we go. So, Ken, you made the point more than once in how bad we are at predicting the future. Mm-hmm. So tell us, what's the future of this industry now?
So this is another thing that it's great. So in my latest talks about what is commercial, there's 2 points. Number one, when it comes to new markets, one of the foremost evolutionary organizational theorists on the planet, Howard Aldrich, down in North Carolina, don't know him, but he writes some great books. He says, a lot of times people don't know what they're doing or why. And it's true. You see companies that go out starting with one thing. They have an idea to do one thing. They talk to a couple customers. The customers don't answer the questions the way that you think they're going to answer them. So all of a sudden you pivot. The company pivots, right? And so the companies are groping around in the dark, trying to make sure that they're answering the mail, satisfying the customer needs. And so it's even the people that kind of are providing or want to provide the service are kind of in the dark, and they're trying to figure it out as well. So people don't know what they're doing and why. And then you have Clayton Christensen in his 1994 book saying, hey, listen, Disk Trends, which was an organization, industry group looking at storage media, disk drives and stuff, they would try to predict the future sales of established types of disk drives, larger disk drives. And they would be very, very good at predicting what the markets would be. But when it came to the newer disk drives, the ones that were getting smaller and smaller with larger capacities, they would use the same methods of predicting, and they'd be way off. They'd be off by 300%, either direction. And so the people who were smart at predicting the future for the traditional incumbent industries couldn't predict what was going to happen with the new entrant industries, the disruptive innovation industries. So same sort of thing here. FAA, for example, makes predictions every year on projections every year on aviation industry. How many people are going to fly, how many miles, all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure they do a great job. But they're also trying to predict commercial space launches and stuff. And for some reason, they're all surprised when they predict some number of launch and reentry operations, and it turns out to be some totally different number. So we're just really bad at predicting things that are new, and partially because the people who are doing it don't know what they're doing. They're kind of just trying to survive. And this is another reason why the business perspective, the sociological perspective seems a little bit more realistic than a purely economic perspective. In economics, it's all about efficiencies and profits and self-interest. But in business, it's about legitimacy and power and survival. So a lot of times companies will make decisions that are financially irrational, but because it's a survival thing. You see this all the time. So again, life is a lot more complex than the way life is modeled when you make all these different assumptions about how things operate. But
yeah, I remember reading a book called Super Forecasting, I think it's called. And it's a great book, but there's an email from Donald Rumsfeld to Bush where someone I can't remember, some woman has written down what everyone was talking about at each decadal review, and it's so wildly out each time. Like it's like if you were British in 1900, the French would be your enemy. 10 years later, they're the ally, and it's like it just goes through like that all the way through, and it's just like you can't tell the future at all.
And we're not even talking distant future half the time, right? It's things, so many things go into it, and we think we understand cause and effect. And of course, cause and effect is itself a cognitive construct. And so trying to predict the future is kind of crazy. However, having said that, so I put out a survey, bit.ly/industry-emergence, where it says, how many decades will it take before suborbital tourism is flying hundreds of passengers a year, right? Hundreds of passengers for Virgin Galactic. They fly, 6 at a time? They would have to do 16 flights. They'd have to be flying once a month, twice a month to get to hundreds of passengers a year. And so when do we think we're going to get to flying twice a month for Virgin? That's probably 1 to 2 decades away. It's not 1 to 2 years away, right? We thought they were going to be flying back in 2008, right? It's been 2 decades since they flew. So it's probably within 1 decade, maybe 2. But then I started asking, so fine, when will orbital tourism get to tens of people a year? And it might be there fairly quickly. I mean, 4 people are going up later this year, and I think Axiom has contracted for 3 or 4 flights already. So at 4 or 5 passengers a time, you could get to tens of passengers fairly quickly. So again, 1 to 2 decades probably for that. But then I started asking about suborbital transportation, hundreds of passengers a year. And I don't know if you remember I think it was Guadalajara, when Elon Musk at the International Astronautical Congress put out the video that showed his Starship on a super heavy booster. And first it showed a boat taking a bunch of people out to this platform. And then it showed a bunch of people walking across a gangway to the Starship. And to get to that, I'm looking at the number of people walking across, and there were dozens of people in that shot. And presumably this is a flight that's taking place once a day, maybe twice a day. To get to that level of adoption, that's decades away. And it's not because the technology isn't here. The technology would probably be ready in a decade. It's the people. We're the weak link in the chain. Adopting it, accepting that, taking that for granted, being able to afford it. We're the weak link. There were studies that were done there's a guy named Mensch. What was his first name? He was an economist, Mensch, 1974, 75, something like that. Stalemate of Technology. He wrote a book where he said, in invention, something is invented over here. By the time from the time between it's invented and the time that it turns into a product, innovation process, turning it into a product that somebody uses, that can take anywhere from 50 to 100 years. And it's not because the technology isn't there. The technology was created. It was getting people to accept it. And there's a huge lag. And sometimes that lag is very short in cell phones and apps and stuff. And so I suppose it depends on a bunch of things. But he was looking at the electromechanical industry of the late 1700s, early 1800s. And he was looking also at the chemical industry, primarily in Germany in the 1800s. That led to all the alkynes and alkydes, right? These are the dyes that they were creating back then that they ended up turning up and trying to use as cancer drugs in the early 1900s. But looking at those industries,
I'm thinking that sometimes the way to the product or the technology is so culturally ingrained that it will take a generation at least for full adoption. And for me, the clear example is self-driving cars.
Man, they're great. They're great.
I'm sure. All the logic says we should all be using self-driving cars today.
Right.
But I don't see that happening until a few decades, and until there is a generational change.
That's probably right. Well, and so cars, it's going to be easier. I think it's going to go faster with cars. So I do own a Tesla. I do have the autopilot and auto navigation. I don't have the full self-driving yet, and it is wonderful. It makes driving long distances much, much easier, much less tedious. It's amazing. But for example, that same technology, put it in 3 dimensions, drones and airplanes should be flying themselves as well. And yes, people will be uncomfortable being in a plane with no pilot, but hey, you just saw Jeff Bezos' brother and Wally Funk and the 18-year-old go up in a vehicle that had no pilot. It was just fully autonomous. The problem with adoption for self-flying planes is going to be air traffic control. The unions of air traffic control are not going to admit that it's safer to have them autonomously flown than having people control it. So self-driving cars are anywhere from 4 to 10 times safer than people driving cars.
That's always my theory, is that eventually it's going to be the insurance companies that are going to push us into driving, having self-driving cars. If you want to drive your own car, then your insurance is going to be 10 times as much, right?
No, that's absolutely right. And insurance companies absolutely can act as private sector regulators. And Mark Twain writes about this in Life on the Mississippi. When there were steamboat pilots, and there were 2 captains on each steamship, they created a union, and the union pilots had a special key that would unlock boxes. And in the boxes would be notes from the previous captains that had gone down the river. Because the Mississippi River, I guess it changes all the time. I mean, I know nothing about the waterway navigation, but I guess it's not just simply driving up and down. I mean, there's a lot of complexity that's involved. And they would write down the information it was safety information that would go into these boxes, so that the captains, if they were members of the union, would have these keys and they could get that information. And there was fewer accidents on the ships that had union captains. So it turns out that the insurance companies would raise the rates for those steamships that did not have at least one union captain on board. And so same way, I've talked to industry insurance folks in the commercial space industry saying, hey, you guys could act as private sector regulators. The government doesn't have to do it. You could require that the flights be fully autonomous, or you could require certain standards based on research. And he's going, nah, we're not going to do that. They're going to rely on the government, which is, come on, American. The private industry should take this up. And Peter Drucker sells this all the time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems odd, doesn't it? Because you would think the insurance companies are just all about the statistics and the money, right?
And they will. And maybe there just isn't enough statistics right now. And, this is one of the market failures when there's a negative externality that comes out of your, some industry action or something. Ideally, the private sector would figure out a way to profit from rectifying that externality before, having to have regulation come in and be mandated by the government.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, no, you brought it up that insurance actually could do quite a bit. And I've thought about, hey, we should sell, passenger experience insurance on these flights, because I don't know what the requirements are for going up in Blue Origin or going up in Virgin Galactic. But I've talked to people that have gone through the centrifuge testing to experience the acceleration profiles of these suborbital vehicles. There was a woman I know of. She runs a gymnastic organization. She's super fit. And if you looked at her and just, had to figure out, would she be okay with this? Check, you'd say, not a problem, go. She can do headstands and backflips and whatever. She's super fit. She got in there, and because of some physiological something, she felt like an elephant was sitting on her chest, and she thought she was going to die. She thought it felt like she said that she had run a marathon, and this is just on the ascent. And they still had to come down where the G profile is actually a little bit worse. And so she was freaking out. And so can you imagine going up and paying $250,000, getting in a cabin with 6 strangers, and then the person next to you freaks out, totally pukes all over the place or something? What if I sold you insurance against that happening, so that if that does happen, you get to do another ride?
Having been on the parabolic flights, on the Vomit Comet, which there's a reason why it has that name, if you make an insurance against people puking on flight, it's going to be a very expensive insurance to make a profit.
Well, I'm absolutely not a businessman, and I'm not ever going to go into that business, but I have heard that Vomit Comet's different than a single parabola. I mean, Vomit Comets is how many parabolas on it's 0G, it's 10 parabolas. Vomit Comet, typically it's 20, 30, 40 parabolas. Here you're talking about just going up and coming down. So actually all the docs say you can either treat it with medicine or just, pre-mission prep, just don't eat something a certain number of hours before. So with a single parabola, it's not an issue. But somebody having like a physical condition where everything has to be locked down, or somebody going crazy, it's totally possible. So unless that training is required, I would not want to get into a cabin with a bunch of strangers unless everybody has at least gone through the centrifuge testing, just so they know what to expect.
I just want to go back to this idea. I know you don't want to call it a dichotomy, but there does seem to be a bit of pressure between trying to like endorse this kind of new tourism and everything else, and the fact that I think most people perceive the FAA as the people trying to make it all safe and regulate it basically.
It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. Our goal is not to make it perfectly safe. I mean, we can't. So basically I see it as a triangle where you've got public interest on one side, you've got government interest on another side, and you've got industry interest on the third side. All 3 sides want safety, but all 3 sides also want to do something else that's not safe. I mean, and again, going back to the...
and you could say that they have a different tolerance to risk.
Sure, they absolutely do. For example, if the government has a big national security payload on a big rocket they have to put into orbit, but if you did all the analysis, they'd be violating the, safety, limits and all that sort of stuff. You think that's going to stop them from flying? No, they're going to violate the public safety limits, and they're going to put that satellite in orbit. So they'll violate public safety if it's in the interest of national security. But our job is to make sure that industry doesn't get away with it. The industry can't violate the public safety limits. So But like I said, with the Department of Interior, you have a bunch of people that want to go into the forest, that want to hug the trees and say, this is absolutely beautiful. You have a bunch of people that want to like raft down the Colorado, create a bonfire, pull out the guitar, sing songs, drink beer, and go nuts, you know? So, I mean, so you've got people that want to do both. You've got people that have conflicting interests on the public side, on the industry side, and on the government side. And so it's not just single dipole. It's a triangle with a whole bunch of conflicting interests on all sides.
Yeah, so your triangle is almost made of, each side is made of a different material almost, isn't it? You've got like different tolerances on each side. And I guess that, how hard is it then to sort of get everyone, are there any arguments? Because presumably when you're working in a kind of, in that environment where there's no set rules, it's not like if this, then that. It is a kind of discussion because like you said, it's on a continuum. So can it be a fraught place to work where people have varying opinions, or is it actually quite a kind of harmonious place?
It's super busy. It's a super busy place. If I got my numbers right, last fiscal year, and we count fiscal years from October 1 to September 30. Last fiscal year, I think there was like 36 operations that we regulated. This year already, we're at 51. So just the number of things happening, the number of licenses, the number of reentries is just really taking off. The number of people working at FAA has been increasing too. So, but everybody is working really hard on the regulatory side, on all sides, but you were talking about the regulatory side. So it's really, really busy. There is, again, it's a balancing act. They absolutely want to ensure the public safety, but on the other hand, our analyses aren't perfect. They're probabilistic. They're not deterministic, right? So the actual line of what is safe and unsafe is more of a blurry gray area, right? We tend to go to the left, to the conservative end of that blurry gray area. We're doing a lot of work now to try to, through our research program, to try to make that blurry gray area less blurry. You know, but it's still going to be gray. It's not going to be a solid line. And so we're trying to do that. And so that's where some tension comes in. We say you should be here in the blurry gray area. And the company that's trying to fly says, no, you should be over there on the blurry gray area. And so that creates some tension, especially when you have like a CEO that's tweeting really dickish things. So, you know, you just deal with it.
Yeah, there was a situation.
Pathetically.
Yeah.
What can you say?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just actually wondering. I remember this whole situation of them launching while there was the FAA inspector that could not make it, and they launched anyway. And now they're building a launch tower, but they didn't get fully the environmental analysis approvals, or they're doing it at their own risk.
Yeah, so I don't know much about the launch tower thing. The launch tower thing, if they haven't done the EPA, the environmental stuff, that's a tough nut to crack, because environmental studies take a long time and they cost a lot of money. And if they didn't do it, I live in the historic district here on Capitol Hill. If I decide to concrete over my front yard because I don't like nature, you know, the DC government's going to come and say, you can't do that, you know, take it out. So I'm going to have to break up that concrete and take it out. So, I mean, it could happen. So there's a couple branches, tangents I want to take here, and I don't want to take all the time. But number one, for SN8, serial number 8 of Starship, they were going to fly. They ran into an abort situation or something. You know, they aborted the countdown, and the window of available time for them to launch closed. All of a sudden, whatever they were doing violated the public safety limits. And the FAA inspector said, "You're done for today." And they said, "No, we're not. We're flying." And they went and flew. So that is a breakdown in safety culture. And so what the FAA did, consternation of many people in Congress and up on the Hill, they said, you, SpaceX, will have to show us how you're going to revise and improve your safety culture before we let you fly again. And they ran it down to the wire. They had to delay their launch of SM-9 by a day because they hadn't submitted the last little bit to that analysis. But FAA, AST, to their credit, used this as a developmental opportunity, a teaching moment, right, to get SpaceX, at least the Starship part of SpaceX, to clean up their act.
Maybe you guys should be given a self-destruct button in case they fly outside of the.
Well, but I mean, that's a little extreme, but okay, that's right. But we used it as a teaching moment. There were a lot of people that said they should have been fined, and the heavy hammer of the government could have been brought down upon them, and we did not do that. So, anyways, they did conform. They complied. They learned from their mistakes, and supposedly everybody's, happy with everybody from now on. However, what this points out is, remember I was talking about in innovation meta theory, there's three groupings of innovation theory. One of the groups called functional goal model of innovation theories talks about different relationships of industry groups to government groups. And I'm oversimplifying. It's the internal units, which can be industry, but and some government, or the external units to the industry, which could be mostly government, but maybe some industry. So when the industry units are weaker than the government, external units, then they can have two different types of relationships. One is called the dependence relationship, where the industry says, you government, you more powerful government, tell us what to do, and we'll do it. They feed all goal setting to the stronger government. They're very reactive. They're dependent on the government. And this is a relationship that I think reminds me of the space race era. It reminds me of a lot of space industries now, where if the government tells me to do it, I'll do it. I remember there was a conference way back in 2003 or 2004, where a SpaceX, an orbital ATK guy got up on stage. They were in part of the COTS program, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program. An orbital guy got up and said, if the government asks us to do it, we'll do it. That's our goal. Then he got off stage, and a SpaceX guy, these were the other participants in the COTS program, SpaceX guy got up on stage and said, we're going to Mars. And so they had their own goal. So when the government is super strong and the government's weak, and the industry is weak, there's this dependence relationship. If the government is strong and the industry is weak, the industry might take a different relationship called an accumulation relationship. And this is where they accumulate all those resources that they need to become independent and to grow away from the government. The government might be needed early on in what they call a techno-proto market, but a niche market. But they want to grow beyond that. When the industry unit gets stronger and stronger and stronger, they enter into different types of relationships. And you look at some industries like U.S. automotive industry or tobacco industry, where ultimately the industry starts flipping the government the finger, telling us, what's good for us is good for you. We'll tell you when we're ready to comply. So they get into this fortification, what's called a fortification relationship. And sometimes, my friend makes great cars. Displays behavior, which could be, you could characterize as falling into that fortification relationship, flipping the finger.
Yeah, I mean, presumably that starts to play into innovation as well, doesn't it? Or does it? I mean, does that affect how innovative companies are?
Companies start out innovative, and then they tend to slow down. They tend to focus. I mean, after the Model T was introduced in 1913, and a new model was not introduced until the late 90s, 29 rather, in late 20s. So, I mean, a company will be super innovative, and then they'll lock in. And
once they find the cash cow,
once they find
the dominant design, the established product,
that's it.
Once you are there, innovating, doing new products is not efficient. It's not where you maximize the profit, right? So once you found that application where you can get the income, that's when you switch to an optimization of your processes.
That's right.
How to make that product, but simpler, cheaper, safer, you call it, whatever your market needs, so you can maximize your profit by turning that product in as close as you can to a commodity.
And so that's when, so all the innovation effort goes from the product to the process. And then, but once you've optimized that, then all the innovation's gone because you're just turning the crank.
Yeah. But that's what we did in the switch from Ariane 5 to Ariane 6,
Right.
Was a full focus on the process. How to reduce the cost on the process. Yes, there are many parts that are new because you have a rocket that is
a system of systems.
30 years old or 40 since it was designed. So there are certain parts that are obsolete and you make new ones. But the focus was to switch to optimization of the manufacturing processes. How to optimize that to reduce the cost.
Yeah. So I mean, but Elon is still super innovative. He's still got a goal, so he's still going for it. I guess in this model, you'd say once he achieves his goal, maybe that's when he just maximizes efficiency of the process to achieve that goal, because he needs hundreds and thousands of flights to get to millions of people on Mars, right? So he'll probably optimize that process, but the system will probably, like you said, dominant design, lock in. And once he gets it up and running and go from there. So innovation moves from product to process. And then once that's optimized, innovation stops pretty much because he's just turning the...
And until when you have the disruptor coming in with something different, right, which is what we're going through for the past decade and a half.
Yeah, so can the regulator actually get involved with that kind of helping the disruptor?
We can get involved by getting out of the way, right? So this is what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to figure out how can we predict the future, see what innovations are coming, and then figure out what's the best way we can ensure public safety, but get out of the way of the innovation. And so we're trying to do that. And I just made a pitch this afternoon to my bosses saying we have to use, process research and adaptive strategy to do all this, qualitative data collection and these institutional arrangements, resource endowments, and proprietary functions, which is a huge lift in terms of qualitative data. I mean, you're collecting tons of data, but once you've got it, number one, it's mapped out, it's reusable, it's high quality, it can be used to develop management theory as well as adaptive strategy, tactics and stuff. So it's really, really useful. But guess what? Nobody in the industry is doing it. This is totally new in the industry, so nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. They look at me like I'm crazy, and they know I am. But when they go and talk to, and so when managers don't know if something can't judge quality, they got to turn to a colleague that they trust and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" They're going to say, "He's nuts. He's crazy. We've never heard of this before," right? So it's an uphill battle. I'm still fighting uphill on this one, but if I can pull this off, basically expand my PhD research to other industry segments that we regulate and really understand the industry so much better than we currently do, then that'll be a major win. And the major win is that this data then is made public to everybody. So, I mean, ultimately, and the heavy lift is going to be mapping out the major historical events that show the emergence of the heavy lift orbital transportation. So that's going to be the fun industry segment, because that goes all the way back.
Wow, have you got any kind of gut feeling about where that goes, or being now you're sort of in the swamp of the data? Do you have an insight?
Well, so I really don't. What I'm interested in looking at the data is the phenomenon, the process by which this is happening. So you can ultimately predict. And by understanding the phenomenon, you can then start saying, well, this independent variable, this metric or this index is important, and this one's important, and this is how they're related to this mediating variable, and that's how they affect this dependent outcome, which could be whatever you're talking about, number of firms or number of launches or whatever. And that's kind of what I'm interested in, but my bosses don't care about that stuff. They again want to know the future. They want to know the answer. They want me to have identified that theory, tested it through variance research, with all the statistical analysis. Here's the hypotheses, here's the data, here's all the p-test and the t-test and blah, blah, blah. And so therefore now I know the equation, so now I can tell you the future because I've got the equation. That's what they want. They want steps 2 and 3. And we haven't done step 1 yet. So, a lot of people are saying, here's steps 2 and 3. Here's what we've got, and we've taken surveys of people that said they'll buy tickets and, they've got certain net worth and all this sort of stuff. But we don't even know if we're asking the right questions. We don't understand the phenomenon that we're trying to model.
Yeah. So you're building a crystal ball, But you're making sure you're doing the glass blowing first.
Yeah, we've got to make sure. We're still collecting the sand, right? We're still collecting the sand. But they want to know. They want to know what's. Use the crystal ball now. Yeah, I love that. That's really good. That's really good. I'm going to use that one. So where is it going? What do I want to see from the data? I would love to see number one, this will be great when we get this data because it'll basically provide a visual encyclopedia of how these industries have emerged. And you'll see companies coming in and going out. You'll see number of launches going up. You'll see number of conferences taking place, number of patents, occurring. You'll see investments to different companies happening, the number of licenses given, laws passed, standards created. And you see all that. And what it kind of does, again, it comes out as a big spaghetti chart. And you see how complex these things are. And once you start seeing that, it's sort of like the overview effect, right? You go up into space. Oh my God, Earth is beautiful. It's so fragile. There are no boundaries. I love everybody. You take a look at the data maps we create. You go, oh my God. How did I ever think I could predict what's going to happen? How did I ever think, this is gloriously complex? The problem is, again, complexity and simplicity are two sides of the same coin. You need to see the complexity, embrace the complexity, figure out where the important parts are, and then zoom in there and simplify that part. And so right now they're trying to simplify without understanding the complexity of the situation. And so,
is this the sort of thing that machine learning and AI can have a crack at, or is it too?
To some extent, they can. I mean, we still have to collect the data. And then we can use machine learning. And I have a negative reaction to just using machine learning and AI to go out in big data to basically randomly or look for causation, which may or may not be there, not based on hypothesis, but based on just the brute force approach of looking at everything because an AI can do that. Personally, again, I'm just against that. But if it works, great. It might find stuff that's nonsensical or it might find stuff that's sensible. So absolutely, that could be used. But we're going to start with, and in fact, we want to use machine learning to classify the data, to help us classify the data. Going through the process of, after you've collected the data, processing the data can take hours and hours and hours. Unless you use machine learning and data dictionaries and bada bing, it can be done in seconds. About 90% of that work can be done in 3 seconds. So you can spend just the last 10% going over it to correct the mistakes or to validate the results of the machine. So absolutely. GPT-3, which is like the latest open source AI, billions of parameters, and GPT-J, which is another version of that. And GPT-4 is coming out. Would be great at this. I could hardly wait. GPT, if nothing else, I would like to use GPT-3 or GPT-4 to take the research kind of papers and just rewrite them in a way that facilitates communication. Because and I don't know if you've seen the different examples of how GPT-3 has done that, but if we could use GPT-3 to kind of make our data, our results more accessible to the common person, that would be a major program, major application of GPT-3, which I think would be super useful. Because all of a sudden I would just run my stuff through GPT-3 and then hand it to my bosses and they could understand.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an amazing chat. I definitely didn't expect chatting to the regulator to go into this area. Is this something that you find often when you talk to people that they don't really expect regulators to be like in this kind of field, or is it just you, Ken? Is it just
Ken? I the other day when we discussed that we had this very short window of time where we could have this recording, and I told you that's not enough time.
I know. Thank God I didn't try it, because my next meeting afterwards.
Ken has been the custodian of all this data related to all these emerging industries, to space tourism, suborbital, micro launchers. I mean, whenever we want to talk about one of these industries, I knew that was not going to be enough time. I actually have still a few questions that I want to ask you more on the practical side once we are back to reality.
Yeah. Well, I apologize. I'm a talker too. Getting 30-second answers are not my forte.
No, I love it. I mean, that's what podcasts are for. Is for long rambling answers of the type we've got. It's absolutely amazing.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it. And if we're not having fun, why do it? I mean, my favorite movie, or the movie on which I base my life philosophy, is based on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. right, from 1989. The two major messages there were be excellent to each other, which is the golden rule, and party on, dudes. Have fun. And so, done. Party on, dudes.
Well, yeah, I mean, now you've told me the backstory. The bit that I can't believe is that you were doing the substitute teaching job.
Yeah, that's kind of wild.
I mean, that's I mean, at least your
students.
Jim,
man. I was trying to teach them ultimate frisbee. I was trying to teach them ultimate.
Brilliant. Go on, Julio. What were your practical questions?
Well, I mean, I feel like now I'm going to get all serious again. But you mentioned way back when in this interview that you said that Blue Origin has already booked 100 million in tickets.
That's what they said.
This is something they announced?
Yeah, no. Jeff Bezos mentioned that in the post-flight interview.
And then you were doing the mental exercise on the number of reservations for Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, that was
and I remember, Wally Funk, which, by the way, apparently, when I was reading up on her, she was the first FAA female inspector, so a colleague of yours.
She's amazing. I mean, Wally Funk, and this is hate Bezos, love Bezos. I mean, look what he did with his tickets, with his available seats. He flew freaking Wally Funk, who should have been flying 70 years ago. She was part of the Mercury 13, right? So the fact that he did that, I mean, Jeff Bezos is building a 10,000-year clock in the base of a mountain, right? This is a guy that fished 2 F1s out of the ocean and refurbished them and put them in his museum and gave one to the National Air and Space.
One of the episodes we had was with the guy that recovered those engines.
Amazing. So, I mean, it's amazing. He gave $200 million to National Air and Space. He just gave $19 $1 million donations. I'm sure you guys got one.
$1 million to Space Generation.
None to the Interplanetary podcast, which was a bit... I'd had to cry myself to sleep the other day. It's awful.
But we don't want to owe anyone anything. We want to be independent.
That is true. We wouldn't be able to slag him off anymore.
But it's amazing.
Going back to Wally Funk. Yeah. Wally Funk apparently had already booked a ticket with Virgin. Right. So then I'm wondering how many when we are questioning what is the size of the market for these tickets. And I'm wondering, how many of those tickets are actually double booked? How these guys with too much money to book these tickets, they just, whichever flight comes first, I'll just book both.
Well, so fine. Virgin Galactic had sold 700 tickets. Then on October 31st, 2014, they fell out of the sky because the guy flipped the switch too early. And so the number of reservations that got returned was about 100. So they're down to about 600 reservations. They'll say they're double booked. 300 individual customers. No other company ever in space industry could say they have 300 independent customers. And that's a big deal. So when I start talking about what is commercial and I look at variation, selection, retention, variation is kind of the number of independent companies working on a system of technologies within an industry segment. So that's the number of companies. Now, selection is the number of independent funding sources, right? Whether it's government or not. And retention, the retention force is the number of independent customers. The proxy for retention would be the number of independent customers. And so 300 is a huge number in the space industry. It's huge. So I would say it's a pretty darn good commercial market, demonstrated demand.
I might start buying shares then.
Well, maybe, I don't know. That's gambling. I don't do that.
Oh, yeah. No.
I don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. But no, so I would say that they've demonstrated through their ticket sale reservations, Virgin Galactic, that they've talked about openly since 2005 or so. I think that's a great demonstration. That's the best demonstration of a market that we have, because Blue has never mentioned it. And I mean, SpaceX, they're launching a lot, but they're basically launching their own satellites half the time, right? So they're their own customers, so they're just vertically integrated into now the satellite internet market. Launch is just part of the supply chain for them. So, but obviously SpaceX has a bunch of independent customers, but it's not 300. So yeah, so vertical tourism is pretty strong.
Their biggest customer is themselves in a way.
Again, yeah, they're integrated into their own chain for another industry.
So. And then I read something online the other day that started me thinking. I would love to know the opinion of the regulator, as Matt is calling you. So when we have launches carried by the government or by a company on the payroll of the government, with the government having the monopoly on violence, right? They can let's say, ask ships not to occupy certain area of the ocean because of risk of debris, or cancel flights, or at least have a no-fly zone. And like you mentioned before, the case of defense, and if it is a defense payload, of course, it makes sense. And if you fail to follow those instructions, the government can do something about it. Now, why would Delta stop flying over a certain area or lose revenue because some billionaire or some tourists want to go into space, for example, or why some shipping vessel will lose 1, 2, 3 or a week of income because of launch operations in a certain area. You see where I'm going? Yeah. Once it's government, I understand how it goes, but once it's just two companies competing for completely different industries, completely different segments, but one is compromising the revenues of the other. Right. This happens every day in different industries, but I wonder how it applies in this case.
Well, so again, I'm talking as Ken, not as FAA regulator, but the way I understand the problem is, and the problem typically is flights off of Florida, heading east at some azimuth, and disrupting the flights between like the Caribbean and the north-south flights flying up and down the east coast of the U.S., especially during Thanksgiving, which is those are big tourist travel times. The problem is that planes have got to either slow down. They have a bunch of different strategies for making sure that the planes don't enter the hazard area. And how big that hazard area is depends on who you're talking to, or how big that hazard area should be depends on who you're talking to. If you talk air traffic control, when they normally look at hazard areas, they look at 10 to the minus 9th, I think it is, in terms of where the lines are drawn, in terms of probability of fatality or whatever. Whereas AST works with 10 to the minus 6th. So if air traffic is drawing the lines, it's much bigger than if AST is drawing it. And so when Falcon Heavy flew on February, 18th, 2018, whatever, there was this huge hazard area that caused a bunch of flights have to either really slow down so they didn't enter the hazard area by a certain time, and thereby adding time onto their flights, or they had to go around the box, the keep out zone, adding miles and increase fuel consumption and time onto their flight. So all this adds up because you got 200 people or 300 people sitting in the airplane, and so number of passenger miles, the numbers get pretty high, pretty big. And yeah, if this was a space shuttle taking off, everybody would just salute and say, "Oh my God, that's absolutely wonderful. We love it." But if it's a company, SpaceX taking off, they say, "You SOB, why are you cutting into my profit?" So it's
which is not even. It's just putting a car in space. In this case, it's not even.
Well, but so they're saying, "Hey, you're only just putting a car in space. This is frivolous. What are you doing?" And so, I understand the company's perspectives on this, but I think part of it also gets to the question, and this is where I try to put it into a context of research. It gets to the question of is your access to the airspace, is that a right or a privilege? Right now, it's offered to you. The system is offered to you by the government operating a monopoly of air traffic control at zero cost to you, the company. So now, maybe there could be a system, instead of making it free to everybody, maybe people should pay for access to the airspace. And therefore, if some company is going to launch a rocket and it's going to impede people's flow in the airspace, that maybe they should incur a cost to doing that, and the other people could be compensated by not being charged for their access to the airspace for that time. Maybe there's a way of compensating for it by actually charging them overall for access to the airspace, which right now is free.
That's a bit like the electromagnetic spectrum, isn't it? You've got this finite resource, and you do sell off the magnetic spectrum, don't you? Yeah. So
but for some,
not even that, just tolls on a highway.
Yeah, but for some reason we make in the United States, we make the airspace free of charge to anybody who wants to use it. And it's a scarce resource, and, tragedy of the commons and all that sort of stuff. So, there are different ways to look at how to regulate, how the government could regulate and, to make that more fair, because there are these kind of conflicts and these kind of disputes cropping up all the time.
This is what I get whenever I go to the International Strategic Congress, which, by the way, Ken has been the chair of the Entrepreneurship and Investment Committee for how many years now?
Since 2011, I think it was, yeah.
Okay, and I come back from those sessions and with a long reading list. It's really amazing what he has done with that group over the years. It's always you always go into a rabbit hole.
So the keynote speaker for session E6.3, which is our academic session, is going to be Jennifer Woolley. She did a historic event analysis for the nanotechnology industry. So the same thing I did for suborbital, she did it for nanotech a number of years earlier. So she's going to be giving a talk about industry emergence and commercial space for us.
I'm not letting you go before we ask you the question we ask all of our guests, which is, tell us your space song. David Bowie is not allowed. Okay. Space Odyssey is not allowed. Said too many times. What's your space music?
I'm going to have to say, for the Yuri's night a couple years ago, I did a video of me singing Fly Me to the Moon on uke. I was playing the uke and singing Fly Me to the Moon.
Tell me that's online.
It's absolutely online. You can find a link to it.
We'll find that link and put it on the show notes then.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Okay, Ken.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The Interplanetary Podcast is alive!
Right, there you go, Julio. I massively enjoyed that interview. Thank you very much for getting Ken on. He seems like a total legend.
Yeah, I know Ken for many, many years. I always enjoy, every time I meet him, I end up learning a lot. And I thought, it's often that I have these multi-hour-long conversations with him. And I thought, well, I think some other people could benefit from them as well.
I just love the fact that he used to be a teacher. They managed to get... Because that kind of... I think, there's still hope for me yet, Julio. There's still hope for me yet. I could do something amazing with my life.
You are doing amazing things with your life.
Oh, Julio,
imagine how many people you are inspiring.
Beautiful.
You were podcasting about space before space was cool.
Yeah, that's true.
Before all these rich kids were playing in going to space, you established your podcast empire.
Oh, absolutely. Anyway, enough about me. This is embarrassing. Julio, what do you think about this news story that Jeff Bezos might not get his space wings after all?
Yeah, well, funny. We had this whole conversation with Ken, who is from the FAA, and then we read this today. That is coming from the FAA today when we are recording, which is after the interview with Ken. The date of this is from the BBC News from the 23rd of July, right?
Yeah.
And it says that the FAA is redefining the commercial wings, the commercial astronaut wings program. So how you get your astronaut wings via the FAA. And they say that to qualify as commercial astronauts, they must travel 50 miles or 80 kilometers. Fair enough. But aside from that, these would-be astronauts must also have demonstrated activities during flight that were essential to public safety or contributed to human spaceflight safety.
There's a little bit of me that kind of goes, yeah, I get that, because as soon as we start getting people paying to go up and they haven't really done much, it does seem a bit silly to call them astronauts rather than just tourists, space tourists. But I think that Jeff Bezos, being that he's the person that's kind of paid for the whole system and presumably has been involved with it and then tests it on himself, I think he has made some contribution to spaceflight safety, hasn't he?
You could argue that. I think it was Also quoted in this article the Blue Origin CEO Bob Smith saying that there's really nothing for a crew member to do while they're flying. I mean, it's clearly pointing out how automatic it is, and you can also say that you did all this safety testing. You don't need. They did safety tests with mannequins, right? Mm-hmm. That's when you do your safety testing. In the case of Virgin, you had to do it with humans because you need the pilots.
I know,
right?
but both Branson and Bezos have paid for it. You know, it's their program after all, isn't it? Really, I mean, so
I mean, if you would grant astronaut wings based on the advancement they made for the space industry, then I can give you a list of several dozens of people that would also need to get those wings.
But they haven't been to space.
Like Elon Musk, for instance.
But he hasn't been to space, so he hasn't got his astronaut wings. You need to do both.
But then again, the definition: demonstrated activities during flight that were essential to public safety or contributed to human spaceflight safety. But then again, this is the commercial astronaut wings program of the FAA. You have other ways to get astronaut wings. You can get them as well through the U.S. military, through NASA. I mean, you could get cosmonaut if Russia gives cosmonaut wings or not. But also they quote in this article, they say that an FAA spokesperson told CNN they are not currently reviewing any submissions. So it also means that they did not submit to try to get these commercial astronaut wings from the FAA. So I think honestly now the more we talk about it, the article is about nothing. It's just as usual trying to raise some sort of controversy where there is none.
Okay,
I think in both cases they all got astronaut wings, organized by the companies themselves. Mm-hmm. You mentioned,
but Red Bull gives you wings.
No, but you mentioned what astronaut gave the astronaut
it was
Chris
Hadfield.
That was to Branson.
Richard to Branson,
And
or
who
Dickie
gave
Pickles.
the astronaut wings to Jeff
I don't know.
Bezos?
Was there a ceremony with Jeff Bezos? I didn't see that.
I didn't follow that so much.
No, I didn't see it. I was, but okay. Let's get to the real controversy, which we mentioned in the interview with Ken, which I thought was a little bit unfair of me because it's like putting him on the spot about what he thinks. But what do you? I mean, the real controversy is really there seems to be this stupid dichotomy of they're either evil billionaires who are ruining the planet with their carbon footprint and frivolous space tourism, or they are heroes developing the new frontier.
Well, you know, Matt, I know you have been watching For All Mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a particular episode that comes to mind here called The Grey, right?
Nice, right, yes.
In which there is, not to go into spoilers, but we seem to live in a world today, thanks or by fault of social media and clickbaiting, in which everything needs to be black or white, when in reality we live in a gray world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you should not evaluate. I mean, I'm not fully on board with either of them, but I'm also not fully against. Everyone does good things. Everyone does bad things, and it's impossible for anyone these days to live up to the standards that we are setting ourselves against in social media. If you speak for something, you are speaking against something else. If you are keeping silence, then you are. They treat you as if because you're silence, you're validating something else as well. Okay, think about these guys. They, Jeff Bezos, for instance. Yes, Blue Origin, New Glenn. New Glenn could bring more competition to orbital spaceflight, reducing costs even more, unlocking potential uses of space that could be much more beneficial for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think
solar space power, one of them. Okay.
Yeah, or just move. I mean, if we are to believe Jeff Bezos is
but that's the one of moving industry to space, manufacturing in space. Okay, that's more long term. But but
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We've got to get there somehow, haven't we? And Bezos,
exactly.
and Bezos being a student of O'Neill, probably really is on board with that. And the same with Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk kind of puts his money where his mouth is with carbon capture prizes. He does lots of talks on global warming. It's not like they're deniers, is it?
We are criticizing these guys which are advancing our industry.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I always in agreement with the way they do things? No, but who am I? Right?
Yeah, no.
I mean, well, no, and because they do things the way they do, they are changing everything. I welcome it. And just think of all these other billionaires that are in their yachts.
I'd rather Bezos and Branson spend their money developing new systems and putting their money into technology than buying Rolex watches and fashion garments and stuff like that. I'd rather do that.
I mean, I'd rather everyone get taxed more. That's for sure, because then we, as society, as governments, we can decide what's best for us. But I also rather these guys think, or at least have a belief, or where they should be spending their money on, that is more productive than just, again, having the wildlife. But they are not the only ones. I mean, there are many examples of billionaires or millionaires that turn to scientific research, not necessarily connected with space, but you have all these other ones that are like funding research vessels, ships to do ocean research. Yeah, that's pretty cool as well.
Here's my problem with the people that moan about it, and it's more to do with, like, Jeff Bezos is a billionaire. Well, if you have the opportunity to be a billionaire, you take it. And it's not his fault that he's not being taxed enough, because he's hardly going to go, oh, actually, can you tax me more? In fact, he may have even tried to be taxed more. So this is the thing that annoys me, is like governments or anyone who actually is the person that decides how to tax people, i.e. people who vote for governments, who decide how people should be taxed, then they are to blame. It's not the person who doesn't pay their tax, because all you have to do is legislate so they do. It's not Jeff Bezos' fault he doesn't pay enough tax.
Yeah, but then it's not those people creating those taxes. It's those people who is going to vote for the one that says, I will create more taxes.
Well, this is exactly right. So it's society, not Bezos. Yeah. It's not Bezos, is it? And
we live in a broken society. That's what we are discussing. We're living in a broken society, and it's good that these guys spend their money the way they do.
Exactly. It's not broken, though, because the actual reality is that these billionaires, like Bezos and Branson, pump it into building up things that we wouldn't have if we left it to governments to do. And so, in other words, like, government couldn't spend their money like this because it would seem too frivolous to the public. So there is, in some ways, it's quite clever that the system seems to be broken, because it's actually not. It's actually a subtle continuum that the system's on. It's not right and it's not wrong. It's just the system that we have that actually works pretty well.
Now, let's not think that these guys are doing the investment in space for philanthropic reasons. Space is and will be very strategic.
Yeah.
And these guys, as cheesy as it sounds, by opening this new frontier to more commercial use of space, this is trillions at play in the future.
For everyone.
Not tomorrow,
though.
Maybe in a few decades, but it's trillions.
But for everyone. But for everyone, right? So they're
for everyone. But if they get there first, there will be trillions for everyone, out of which they will still get 80%. So.
But that's it. But you've got to encourage people to do that, haven't you? I don't know. I mean, I just think it always seems so silly to have this thing of.
I'm not
saying where will people draw the line?
You should discourage them. All I'm saying is, let's not be naive. One can talk about building industry in space. If you build industry in space, who's going to make money out of it?
Well, name one thing that you do where it's not trying to further Julio Aprea's life and make his family richer. As in, everyone
making
has
this
the
podcast.
That is true. That does show that you're a very.
But Matt, okay, let me.
But
hard.
everyone is trying to make themselves richer, right? And more. And
I don't think everyone is trying to make themselves richer, but these guys are, and they're doing a damn good job at it. And again, space. Okay,
it's Musk trying to make himself richer.
Let's go back to the space manufacturing industries or whatever what Jeff Bezos wants to create in space. Okay, he wants to enable building manufacturing in space. Manufacturing is a huge source of capital and richness as well. So if he has such a stake on that, and in a way in which it's more competitive, if somehow it's more competitive to do it up there than down here someday. The guy does not currently. He already controls the world. He will then control space. It doesn't. I read one of those books on the space.
You need to be more.
He was always
charitable.
interested in space.
Surely.
I think he had a connection with sets. For part of this flight, they gave $1 million to many organizations. I think we mentioned that during the interview, including Space Generation, very dear to my heart. Including, I think, the Challenger Center as well. It's amazing organization, inspiring people, inspiring kids to go into this. We live in the gray, and I stand by that.
We totally live in the grey. I just think everyone misses the point when they see billionaires doing things. I was having a thought the other day where I was listening to someone going, I took a helicopter trip over the Grand Canyon and it was amazing. And I was thinking, God, I can't afford that. And I was thinking, God, it's so annoying that people slightly richer than me can afford to just do frivolous things
and
like
the carbon footprint on that.
The carbon
footprint.
And it's like, at what point do we draw the line on the wealth that people have to do things that are enjoyable in life? I think nowhere, because if the moment you start doing it, then it's like it's a race to the bottom.
No, but the ones that criticize these guys for going to space with a certain carbon footprint should stop immediately all those package deals to go to Canary Islands or the Mediterranean islands for the summer or whatever they go in.
But that's what I'm saying.
Or they should immediately cancel their cruise trips. It's completely. It's just posture. You want to be online and posture yourself as virtuous and look at how I'm. It's just
do you know what? This is the most political I've ever been, but I just think there's something about people trying to do that. We should encourage people to put their money into technology and space.
What they're doing here is brilliant.
Yeah,
what they're doing here is brilliant, and if you want eventually to improve the world environment, you need to do a lot more in space. Because by reducing carbon on Earth, what do you want to? You want to stop productivity. You want to grow less crops. You want to have less food for people. You want to reduce the population. I mean, what do you want to do? You have to count on space. If the planet cannot take it anymore, you have to expand. Or you have to move those carbon guilty industries.
Have you not watched The Expanse and see what happens when you expand into space though, Julio? All the problems still remain. Oh God.
So much for a short episode.
So much for a short episode. Oh, well, there we go.
I'm sure we can discuss about this controversy for ages, but a great philosopher once said, haters gonna hate.
Haters are gonna hate. Oh, I'm going to put in the link as well. I'm going to put in the show notes the letter that the NASA administrator sent to the nun about the nun complaining about how the Apollo mission, they could have spent all the money saving people. And he wrote one back basically saying, giving her a story about how. Well, I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's too good. It's too good.
Tell me more. I don't know about it.
That you can do both. You can feed people, and absolutely you should be spending money on medicine and helping poor people in the world. But you should also be spending money on research and trying to further humankind.
Absolutely. That is why most working governments spend, and depends on the government, substantial or not amount on basic research.
Yeah. I shall also put in the link of Donald Rumsfeld's letter to President Bush and the how you can't see into the future. I'll put a link to that as well because it's so good. That's a good one. But I did mention that.
Yeah, it makes me think. 10 years ago, we were analyzing the coming of the electric propulsion telecommunication satellites. And the whole discussion was if they have electric propulsion and they will take longer to get to geosynchronous orbit, will there be more orders so that then you have them some on the way? But this means that they require less propellant, so they will become smaller? Or will just the payload increase and still carry the same size of satellite? That was a discussion. In the end, what's happening is you have these mega constellations and the geosynchronous telecom market orders of satellites crashed. And that was none of the scenarios was that.
No. Well, and 10 years ago, people weren't thinking of reusable rockets either. Well, they were thinking
10 years ago, yes.
Well, no, Musk was, but everyone was poo-pooing it 10 years ago, going, it won't work.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You had the true believers and the rest of the world.
Yep. And the true believers were quite small in 2011. That's for sure.
Yes, indeed. Well, but once you demonstrate, others will follow.
Indeed. So I wonder what we're poo-pooing now that's going to be massive in 10 years' time.
Yeah, well, we just had a whole conversation about what people are poo-pooing now, right?
Exactly.
10 years from now, those same people will be taking a cruise to Jupiter and back.
I don't think 10 years,
down a few decades.
Yeah.
And the carbon footprint of those, my God, the amount of carbon you're going to be releasing in outer space in vacuum.
That's a good point. You know those really lovely posters of space tourism where it's like a sort of 1920s Art Deco picture of someone going skiing on Europa. Yeah, I love them. I bet half the people that were complaining about Branson and Bezos have those posters in their house, unironically. So anyway, on that one, what do you think?
Matt, if people want to know more about the podcast, if they want to see the show notes, where should they go?
They should go to www.interplanetary.org.uk. If you can't remember that, it's an orgy in space. But it's the but if you want to get super involved, you could also nip over to www.patreon.com/interplanetary. That may even be easier to remember. And that way you can join all the Spodcats on Discord and things like that. And we have ever so much fun. And we've had some brilliant discussions in the Discord about this very subject. Some very passionate beliefs, but they do seem to fall on the side of the stuff that we've been talking about. But I do know that there's people in the Discord who I think potentially disagree with others in the Discord. Maybe they can speak up because it's a free place. Julio, what are you doing this week, and have you got something to plug?
I have interviewed on the Spanish version, Interplanetario. I have interviewed Raúl Torres, who is the CEO of PLD Space, one of the micro launcher companies in Europe. They are developing a micro launcher. Obviously, the interview is in Spanish. We go for about an hour and a half. Very interesting interview. Many topics that normally are not, not discussed at length. So for those that understand Spanish, they might want to pop in and listen to that interview.
Brilliant. And I shall put a link to Interplanetario. Was that good? Or was that
Spanish,
too Italian?
Not Italian?
Yeah, Interplanetario.
Interplanetario.
Interplanetario. No, that sounds more Russian. Can't do it. I can't do it, Julio. Sorry. Right, anyway, Julio, shall we let the listeners go? Because we've held them prisoner for far too long.
Hostages.
Hostages to banter. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, man.
Bye, Spudcast.
Bye.